Hello YouTube, and hello viewers, and welcome back to yet another episode of creating our social media API using Laravel. So we've done quite a lot recently. We've set up our environment using Docker. We've managed to get Laravel installed on our Docker container. I've currently got Docker running in the background. So if I had to do Docker PS, you can see that everything is running that we want. So if you haven't got yours up and running as of yet, I must suggest that you get it up and running before we start this session, so we can start working with inside Laravel. So today we're going to do a few things. Since we got Laravel installed, we're going to set up the environment for Laravel. Now this is going to be able for us so we can start writing stuff to the database. It's just setting up the environment file, and I'm going to show you how to connect to your databases and stuff using Docker and an application called Heidi SQL, which I would suggest that you download. I'll put a link in the description below, and you can check that out and download it. I would highly recommend it. You could do it in PHP Storm if you had PHP Storm. I know some people do like using database connections with inside PHP Storm, but I like to keep things external. It's just a little bit more easier for me. So today's session is going to be all about setting up our Laravel instance inside our environment file, so that we'll be able to send stuff to our database and we can start writing some data and start using whatever we need to do with our database. Because don't forget, a lot of backend work relies a lot on databases. So let's get started. So currently what we have is inside our folder directory, we've got this Laradock, and then we've also got another one which is Laravel. And we did this in the last session. This has pretty much everything inside it. If we do a ls/la onto that directory, you'll notice that we've got an environment file within inside this directory. This is pretty cool because remember, the same thing as the Laradock stuff, we had to do some changes to the env file. This is your environment, and this is a hidden file that you don't really share with anyone. We can keep all our secret data inside this environment file, so it's very handy to have. And we're going to set that up so we can work with our database. But to do that, we need to do a few changes to that env file. Now you could be a complete nerd and we could just do nano.env if we wanted to, and we could change it all in here if we want, but that's very nerdy. So we're not going to do it this time around. We'll actually do it inside our IDE, so we have it all set up and running. So I'm going to jump onto my PHP Storm. As you can see, I've got my Laradock currently open on my PHP Storm. We don't want this. We're going to switch this over. So I'm just going to open up not this, because this is the Laradock. So we're going to go back one. And I'm actually just going to open up the Laravel app here and say new window, because we don't need this anymore. And here we go. So now this is all the files we can see. So if I go back to my command line, you can see that we've got all these files here. Exactly the same thing that we can see inside the PHP Storm. There's nothing different. It's all the same. And the thing we're going to be manipulating the most is this .env file. And as you probably guessed, we're going to be changing some database stuff. So really, all we're going to be changing is these fields here. But you can see there's a few things we can change. So things like mail, AWS, Pusher, which we're going to be using. Push is pretty cool because we can send real-time notifications off and then get responses back, which is pretty cool. So if you're doing any mobile app dev, for example, and you need to send messages to your front-end developers, you can just send off these requests and they can get them real-time, which is pretty sweet. There's going to be a few other things like Elasticsearch we're going to add into this. So if we do any searching and stuff like that, we can put the brunt on the server instead of doing it in the app. Just stuff like that. So we're going to be playing with a few of those settings. But mainly the thing that we're going to be working on in this episode is going to be this database connection here. So before we get started, we're going to need a few things. So in your case, if you want to, just jump onto your browser. And if you're running Windows, I'd strongly suggest that you get this Heidi SQL. This is pretty cool. Oh, I'm not running AdBlock, but I'm in incognito mode, but hello. So just download this application. It's just a very simplistic installation. It's not that difficult. It's pretty straightforward, and get it installed onto your system. This is going to allow us to communicate to our database, which is on our container. So if we had a look at our command line and do docker ps on the command line, oops, I didn't even write anything, docker ps, you'll notice that we have this MySQL here. This is pretty much our SQL database, which is holding all our information inside there. So for every single project, you'll create yourself a database table, an actual database, which will then hold a numerous amounts of tables with information for whatever we want to store. So if we're making a social network, obviously we're going to be storing things like usernames and passwords, and then we're going to be storing like posts or status updates, friend requests. We're going to be storing a lot of data that we're going to be using, and we'll be sharing that between each table. And it's actually quite fun, once we start getting into it. So stick with it. So we need to get somehow into this Laradock MySQL. So once you've got Heidi downloaded, you can open it, and it gives you a nice little interface like this. Now you can see I've already got one set up because obviously I'm using it for my dev at home. But you see this local session. If you don't have this, it might be empty anyways. You just have a blank session. And basically we need to set up a few of its properties here on the right hand side here. So first of all, you want to make sure that your network type is MySQL, because our server, remember when we did the Docker install, we chose MySQL as our network section. So we need to make sure that's there. Our library needs to be this. I think by default, Heidi already sets this, so you don't really need to worry about that. The host name is your local host. So in this case, it's 127.0.0.1. Now remember, on our Laradock, so if we just open it, we have all these different, now I've got a few, but on our one that we're working with, this Laravel.conf, you'll notice that we have this Laravel test, and I said, oh, well, if we change the host name, we do 127.0.0.1, we then change it inside the host file. We then got a name. Do I need to put the name here in this host name IP? The answer to that's no, because our database is purely connected to that IP address. So we don't need to change anything in regards to names or whatever. We just make sure that we be very specific on the host name. The username for our Docker MySQL, and this is for everybody, is root. And the actual password is root 2. So you got root and root. And this is very important, so you need to remember that both of these are going to be root. You can change it in the Laradock settings if you want, but there's no point if you're working locally, just keep it as root. It makes sense. Obviously, if you go into development production, that's a different story. Obviously, you have your own username and your own password that you'll be using, and probably a different host name that you'll connect to. And then you've got things like port numbers. Now, these are, again, very specific to if you're going into development, but if we're working locally, it's definitely going to be 3306. And then once you've done that and you say open, and you've got obviously your container up and running. Sorry, I've actually got live data here, which I should really have got rid of. We'll just clear all this out. You should have your local here, and you'll have like a few bits and pieces. So for example, you have MySQL, you'll have a performance schema, I think, and a sys, and just a few different things. We're going to create a new one for our project. So to make a new database, you're just going to right click on your local, create new, and you're going to create a database. And I'm going to call this one YouTube_social. That way I can keep up to date with what I'm doing. You can call it whatever you want. Just make sure when we do the settings in the env file that it's the same name. So we're going to go OK. And you'll notice that we now have this YouTube social here. And basically, if we go into the database, so this little button here, you can see there's nothing here. So once we start adding some tables, you'll click on the plus and you'll start seeing all these tables coming up on our screen. So it's nice and neat. It's a cool little program. It makes life a little bit more easier if you want to do it that way. I do know that you can do it inside PHP Storm if you want to. So you see on PHP Storm, I don't know if you can see it on the resolution, but if you click on database here, you can actually create a whole MySQL connection here. And you can actually put it inside PHP Storm, which is pretty cool, but I find running queries and stuff on PHP Storm a little bit more complicated than Heidi, and I'll show you that it's a little bit more easy in here and how we can do things on the fly. So now that's set up and we've got this thing called YouTube Social, we need to go into our actual Laravel project and we need to set up some settings in our DB stuff. So the DB connection is the actual connection type. Now we know that's going to be MySQL because that's what we set up to. If you're using things like MariaDB or MongoDB, obviously you change that name to be whatever connection type you're going to be using. The host, so very similar to what we put in Heidi, is 127.0.0.1. This will not work, and I'll explain why. It's a bit strange. Because of the Docker container, it's very iffy when it comes to putting in the host. I mean, sometimes I've put this 127.0.0.1 in and it works fine. But in some cases, when you try and write to the database, it might just shout at you and it'll be like, can't find this DB host. So to be safe, the best idea for this DB host is to actually put the name of your connection. So if you had a look on your Docker PS, so if we look at this Docker PS here, let me just clear that and make that a bit smaller. I can actually zoom in, which is a bit more easy, I guess, for some people. So if I do Docker PS, you'll notice that each one of them have an image name. And then if you go on further on, you can actually see that they've got a full name here just at the end. Now, if I had to zoom out, if I zoom all the way out and just do the same thing again. Okay, so you can see here there's this thing called names. It's just obviously resolution is a little bit different, but you'll see that on names, we've got a full name of this instance. So we've got the image and then the container IDs, which are important, but the thing that we're more interested in is this names here. And what we want to do is we want to grab the name of our SQL container. So this Laradock _ MySQL _1. We want this because we can put that now into our project, so into Laravel, and we're going to change the host name to be that name, so Laradock _ MySQL _1. Now in some instances, so let's say for example using WAMP or XAMPP, I think 127.0.0.1 should be fine. There shouldn't be a problem. If you may be doing external connections, then you'll put in whatever credentials you're using if it is an external database. But locally, we're just going to stick with Laradock, MySQL 1, port, and then etc. So we're going to just stick with what we have. The database name is not called Laravel. So if we go back to our ID, we can see that we called it YouTube Social. So we want to use this name, and we can't actually copy it, I don't think. So we're just going to have to write it. So we're going to type YouTube _social. That's our database name. Our username is root, and our password is root. So that's pretty much it. Then you can save, and then that's our environment file now set up and ready to go. So before we get started with anything with databases, the best idea is to maybe show you how this all kind of works together with how we put data into our database and etc. And the easiest way to see that is if you look at your project, you'll see that we've got this thing called database. Now, the nice thing about Laravel and its framework, everything is very specific to its location. So in this case, anything to do with database is going to be in here. So anything we're going to do with databases. And everything that we do with databases in regards to adding tables, removing tables, changing columns, changing data types will all be done within inside this database folder, but it'll all be done inside migrations. And you'll notice straight off the bat, Laravel has given us two migration scripts already. One called create users and the other one called create failed jobs. And you'll notice that it's plural. So we have users here. So we're going to have users, but then later on, we're actually going to be using the singular, which will be user. So it might get a little bit confusing sooner on, but your table names are all going to be plural with, just user to users in this example. And also the same here, you've got create failed jobs. So here's your failed jobs. I'll show you how to make these later on in the tutorial, how we're going to create our own migration script. So don't really worry too much about each one of these values, but we want to see if this migration script actually works. So what's going to happen is when I run a command from Laravel, it's going to look at this migrations table, this migration folder, and it's going to look at each one of these in date order, and it's going to create whatever is inside each one of these. So in this case, it's going to create us a users table, and it's going to give us an ID, name, email verified at, and a password. Now, the nice thing about this, and I don't know if you've noticed already, Laravel is kind of giving us a login system off the bat. So this is how nice and easy using Laravel is when it comes to creating very simplistic, user authenticated pieces of software. The create failed jobs is also going to be made, and this is going to be something that's going to hold like connection, queue, payload, exception, failed, and this is any jobs that I'll be running on Laravel, but we'll kind of get to that later on. That's quite far into the tutorial, so I wouldn't really worry too much about that. But when we run the script, it's going to create these two tables, these ones here. We'll be making more in the future, so don't worry too much about that one. So how do we run these? Well, it's dead simple. We're going to go back into our command line. I'm going to zoom in so we can see it now. Control C, Control L. I'm just going to do Docker PS. And remember, we did a lot of work inside this workspace here. So inside this workspace, we need to go back into this container. So the same way we saw, our variables and stuff. So we're going to do the same thing. So remember, we can press Control R, and I'm going to search for execute. And I want to go into Docker execute into this 8cc 6c blah blah blah, and I'm going to be using bash, and that will put us in. And then if I do an ls, you can see everything I've been working on at the moment, but we're more interested inside the Laravel directory because that's what we're working on. So Laravel ls, and you'll see that we've got all the directories that we have inside Laravel. Now the cool thing about this is, to run our migration scripts, we actually have to be inside the container. Other things that I'm going to show you inside the tutorial, we don't really need to be in the container, we can be outside of it, because we have this thing called PHP Artisan. Now PHP Artisan gives us a list of pretty much anything that we can do with Laravel. So things like Tinker, which is pretty cool. So we can just do things within inside the Laravel framework on the fly. We can clear cache if we need to. You can actually create database seeds, we can wipe a database, make keys, and then this here is very important. We're going to be using a lot of these, and this can all be done not inside the container. We can do them outside the container, which is quite nice. But what we're more interested in inside this series or this episode is this migration here, and this migration is what creates all our tables within inside the database. So we can see that we've got this migrate fresh. This will drop all tables and rerun all migrations. Install will create a migration repository. Migrate refresh resets and reruns all migration scripts. Reset will obviously roll back anything that we have, again with rollback, and then any statuses of each one. So we're going to be using these throughout the series, and you'll probably get drilled into your head the ones that we'll be using. But how do we write them? Well, it's dead simple really. If we go back and we do PHP Artisan, is that thing that we wrote before. Okay, so we press enter and we get the list of everything. All you have to do is then add on the extra section. So we have PHP Artisan, and then we can do any of these. So if I do PHP Artisan, and I'm just going to migrate because I'm just going to create my database and press enter, you'll notice it says migration table created successfully, and it's made us our tables. So we've done this create user table. It did it in 5 seconds. And then we've also created this failed jobs table, which did it in 4 seconds. So if we have a look at our Heidi now and refresh, so I just pressed F5, we've got this YouTube social expanded. And you'll notice that we now have this failed jobs table that we wanted. Pretty cool, right? There's no data in it. Migrations. So these are all the migrations that we ran with the same names. So you can see that they got exactly the same name. And we've also got this users table with empty data because we haven't put any data into it yet. So let's say, for example, I make a new migration script and I want to run that again. I'll just do the same thing again. I'll do PHP Artisan migrate. And if I press enter, you'll see, okay, well, I haven't made any new migration scripts, so I've got nothing to do really. So I'm just going to say nothing to migrate. So once you create a migration script, and you run PHP Artisan migrate, it will migrate any new tables that are created, not the previous ones that have been created. But let's say, for example, you want to refresh everything. The best idea would be to do a PHP Artisan migrate. Then you want to do :fresh. And you can see that it drops all our tables. So it'll delete all of them. And then it'll do a migration and it'll do each one of those tables again. So that's probably the easiest way to remove everything and then do a whole fresh install of a migration. So nice easy session really. All you had to do was, number one, go onto the internet, download Heidi if you want to use that. I mean, you can use any SQL interface that you want. I mean, there's loads out there, there's tons, but I just find this pretty useful. I think it's probably the best one I've used to date. And then all you have to do is go into your project, so into your Laravel project, go into your environment file, and just fill in your database connection information. So in this case, MySQL, Laradock, port, the database name. Very important. If you do a mistake with that, you'll get an error when you run that migrate. Then your username and password, which is all fine. Didn't have to change anything in here. I was just showing you where the migrations go into. In the next few episodes, we'll be making new migration scripts, so don't worry about that. We then went into our terminal. So we went into our terminal. I'll just exit out. Inside our terminal, we just did a Control-R, so we can go into our container. So remember, this is our container that we've always been in so far. Go into it. We went into our Laravel folder. And then all we did was I showed you how to run a PHP artisan command. So PHP artisan, which gives us all the things that we can do with inside Laravel. So things that we can make. And I mean, all these things we'll be playing with. So keep an eye out for that. And then really all we did is we ran a few commands. So PHP artisan migrate, which was one of the commands, and that was going to create all our databases, or all our tables, sorry. And then we saw, okay, well, because we've already migrated once, so we wanted to re-migrate, we just use PHP artisan migrate fresh, and that dropped all our tables and then migrated all the tables that we needed. That's pretty much me for this episode. I hope you enjoyed that one. That's pretty much setting up our database and getting that ready for us to do some work. What we're going to look at in the next episode is how do we start looking at creating to put some data in here maybe, and we're going to look at some methodology and stuff like that when it comes to developing these types of frameworks. So I hope to see you guys in the next episode. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like it. If you really like it, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Goodbye.